Hello and welcome back to another episode of Quiet with Knut. Today's episode is going to be slightly different from my usual episodes, as normally I'm arranging music that's written by other people, but back in university I actually studied songwriting for 2 years, and I find I don't actually have that many occasions to do writing these days, even though I quite enjoy it and I would like to do it more. It's just sometimes you have to choose, do you want to spend your time writing music that you might never see any money from, or do you want to be able to pay your bills? Occasionally, I'll see briefs for choral competitions pop up in my Facebook feed, these often being for original compositions. And these can be kind of good to get something to work towards, as you can send in your music, and if you win, you win. If you don't, then at least you have a piece for it. The particular piece I did in this episode, I actually recorded a few months ago before the summer, and I held off releasing this footage just to see whether or not I would win, which I didn't. But I thought it might be useful for you guys to see how you might approach doing original choral writing. So this one will deal with the sort of creative approach to writing for choir, and I'll talk about how you find inspiration and how you might then translate that onto music. So without any further ado, let's step back in time a few months ago and see how I approached writing my original choral composition, which I decided to name Endless Sands. I have to do this pretty much today, so the deadline is next week. Time of recording, I'm recording this in June, and end of June is the deadline for this composition, but I am going to be in Therese's play for the rest of the month, which means that I probably won't have time to work on this, which means that I have to do it today. But that's fine. I think working with a tight deadline means that I get stuff done faster. So I'm completely fine with that happening. A common problem if you're pressed for time is that you can't really rely on just getting inspired, like inspiration from above, like, ooh, here's the piece, and then I write it. That's not going to happen. It might happen, but it's not going to happen. I'm quite used to working like this. This is often the case when I get a brief for, say, choral arrangement. It's like, oh, Knut, we have to have this arrangement done by yesterday, preferably, but tomorrow will do. And then it's like, well, either I do it or I don't, but, do I want to make money? Do I want to be able to pay my bills? So very frequently, I find myself working without really having the time to be inspired. I have to listen to the song and then pretty much just start arranging it immediately. What's good is this can kind of be learned. The more you do it, the more used you get to it. If you get used to working without waiting for inspiration to strike, inspiration will strike. So there's a few different methods or techniques that I use for, forcing inspiration to appear when it has to. So I'm gonna talk through the brief and look at what's there, and then we'll look at how I would approach this brief. As a disclaimer, I'm not a renowned composer or anything. I'm still fairly early in my music career, and I might be the worst composer in the history of music. Who knows? But, take that as you will. These are still, I find, some good tips for, finding inspiration if you don't really know where to start. Okay, so I've got the brief on my screen now, and I'll just go through it point by point. Now, it's very important when you get a brief, you have to follow the brief. If people send out a brief, it means that they have certain requirements that need to be fulfilled. It has to either fit with their programming, or it has to fit with a specific length, or it could be that they just have something very specific in mind. If you want any chance at getting paid for doing a brief, you have to follow it. So let's look at what we got here. It says the piece should be between 3 and 6 minutes in duration. And that is sort of a standard pop song length. So that should be fine. You just got to keep that in mind if you do stuff like lyrics first, which I do, is that you don't write too many of them. Next one says it should be written for no more than 8 vocal parts, SSAATTBB, without the need for accompanying instrumentalists. This is also a fairly common stipulation in a choral brief because they want to perform the piece a cappella, and so the piece needs to be designed in such a way that it can be performed a cappella. So don't go throwing in a big piano solo in the middle because there isn't going to be a piano there. But that's fine. I mean, you just know, right? Has to be a cappella choir the whole way. Fine. The next is probably the more inspirational side of the brief. The piece should respond in some way to the following quote. Very small and damaged and quite dry, a Roman water nymph made of bone tries to summon a river out of limestone. This is from a poem called Knut, and it's by poet Alice Oswald. So there's a lot of stuff in this quote that we can look at, and we're going to look at. Now, it's important to note that it says it should respond in some way to the following quote. So it doesn't necessarily have to use those words. You might be asked to justify exactly how it responds to it, or it could be obvious. I don't think it ever hurts to say why you decided to approach a task in a specific way. Now, they're not asking for that in this case, but if you can say exactly what the inspiration is, then you'll be able to prove that this is in fact following the brief. We'll get back to the poem in a minute, but let's continue with the brief. Working scores will be accepted. For example, 1 minute of music accompanied by a detailed written concept. So if you're not quite sure how you're going to finish the piece, if you need some time to maybe work with the choir itself, then that might be suitable for you. I tend to just want to get it out of the way, do it completely, and so I'll just send them a finished product and be like, here you go, here it is. And then they can make their own calls if they want to change stuff down the line. But it's up to you. I mean, if you perhaps aren't so used to writing choral music and you want to experiment with, funny vocal textures and effects and stuff, that might be fine. According to the brief, they'll accept it if the concept is good. But you do have to write a detailed written concept. So you can't just faff around. You need to know exactly what you're going for. The rest of the brief is just how to apply. So it says it's open to anyone aged 16 or over, which I am. And they can be from anywhere in the world. There is no entrance fee. And there are some it's a pet peeve of mine. I understand why people do it because you might need to hire in musicians to try out the pieces. So sometimes there will be an entrance fee. I don't like it because I don't like to pay to maybe win a competition. I do see why it happens. Could be that they want to get in external examiners who also want to get paid. But you gotta choose for yourself. Do you want to take that risk? Maybe win by paying, Okay, and the next is just, it has to be due by end of the month. And it says where to send it and stuff. So let's not worry about that. What we're interested in now is the poem, where the short excerpt from a poem. We're interested in researching this. So we were definitely going to do some research before we start writing anything because, okay, what am I going to do with this? I don't know. Let's research it. So the first thing I want to do is to just see if I can find this poem online. Now, Alice Oswald is a living poet, so her work is definitely under copyright, but sometimes these people put their work out for anyone to read. So, maybe she has. Let's find out. Okay, so we're in luck because the full poem is available on the poetryfoundation.org. So you can go there and read it for yourself. I'm not going to post it here. I'm just going to read through it and see if I get some sense of the style, if there's any, anything I can take from it that I can use as inspiration for my piece. Okay, so there's a few different things that I can take from this. First of all, Alice Oswald uses a style that is very what do we call it? It's stream of consciousness. It's she doesn't use so much punctuation. It's just sentence. I think she does use spacing quite consciously, which is interesting. But there is a lot of changing scenes, descriptions that come kind of out of nowhere, if that makes sense. Point is, stream of consciousness. So you can imagine someone is thinking it up, writing it down as it goes. It's the Roman water nymph motif seems to be used here to illustrate a dried up river. In fact, the poem is called Dunt, a poem for a dried up river. So in Roman and Greek mythology, nymphs were, what does one say? They were natural phenomena, or they were sentient representations of physical phenomena. So a water nymph would be a river. It would be a representation of that river, but she would also be that river. The Roman water nymph here, very small and damaged and quite dry, is used to illustrate this river itself. She does seem to draw in some societal issues. I get the impression, again, I'm not going to read too much. I get the impression that there is this river is being compared with a person who seems to be homeless, who seems to have kind of dried up and withered away. There's a sense of things that are long gone. I think what I will do next is I will write down a short list of words. It could be it could be things from the poem. It could be emotions that the poem seems to refer to. Just little ideas. Again, stuff just to get my inspiration going. All right, so these are some words that I got out of this poem. Desperation. Thirst? Question mark. Dryness. Dunt. The word dunt is used in pottery. It means a crack that appears if you cool down a piece of pottery too quickly. It's kind of the same thing that happens if you take a glass out of your dishwasher and immediately fill it with ice cold water. So it comes out really hot, fill it with ice cold water, and you might have seen that the water will just crack. It's the same kind of thing happening. Antiquity, Greek or Roman. Struggle. Sentimentality. Abandonment. Ruins or remains. So already here I could literally use these words, or I can just use them as a jumping off point to then inspire me to continue the task. Now, I find the lyrics to be the hardest to do. I am trained in songwriting, but I did find the whole time that doing the lyrics was the hardest for me. I could do music for anything easily. Maybe it's because English is my second language, and I'm not as intimate with it as I am with Norwegian. But that's also why I like to start with the lyrics, because I get the difficult part out of the way immediately, and then I can just do the stuff I like. I'll try and write a poem that is in the style of Alice Oswald. So I'll do one that uses stream of consciousness. It's not going to match. I'm not going to claim to be a great, to know a great deal about Alice Oswald's poetry, but I will try to do something that evokes the same kind of style. And I was thinking, what would be an appropriate theme? Now, for me, the quote there's a struggle there. You have an image of a woman who is representative of the river. She might be an Oceanid or a Nereid or any of those old nymphs, and her natural element is water, and yet she's dried up and she's trying to get water to appear from what appears to be her urn, if you read the rest of the poem. So there's a struggle here, and I do think the concept of thirst and dryness is important. For some reason, I don't really know why, and I'm going to totally out myself as a video game nerd here. When I was reading it, I started thinking of a scene in Uncharted 3. There's a scene. Now, the Uncharted series is like an action-packed, it's an action film type series. So you're going around shooting up people and exploring tombs. It's sort of the spiritual successor to the Tomb Raider series, except, of course, the Tomb Raider series still exists. But anyway, point is, there's a scene, kind of comes a bit out of nowhere. You find yourself, after a high-octane chase in the air, while falling out of an airplane, it's ridiculous. You suddenly find yourself stranded in the desert. And now you'd think at that point they'd be like, oh, they'd cut to black, and then suddenly they'd be, at the next big spot. But actually, they just kind of stay there. And the main character is trapped in the desert. And you spend it felt like ages. I think it might just have been 10 minutes. But you just wander the desert, and you end up walking in circles. You're trying to find civilization, and the main character has there's some sort of internal monologue going on. And it's just a very, very big shift in mood. Suddenly, you've gone from, a very intense plane chase to suddenly being trapped in the desert, dying because there's no food or water or shelter or anything. And for some reason, while reading this poem, I just got that scene in my head. I'd be like, well, there we go. That's inspiration, isn't it? You think of something, it leads you to something else, and then suddenly, you start to create ideas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be writing a poem from the perspective of someone who is wandering in the desert, literally dying of thirst. Okay, I've written a poem, and I really should be wearing a monocle or something, because this is about to get really deep. Okay, so this is my poem. It's called Endless Sands. So thirsty, so hungry. Where am I? I don't understand why this is happening. So hot. Has it been a day? A week? A month? I keep walking. Everything looks the same. So thirsty. My blood is boiling. My tongue is so dry. Endless sands as far as the eye can see. Am I going north? South? Every direction leads nowhere. So hungry. My stomach twists itself around, calls for help. Nobody's coming. What will they do when they find out? Where are my friends? Nobody can help me now. Endless sands, every direction leads nowhere. So thirsty, so hot. My tongue is dry, my skin is burning. Everything is on fire. Oh God, let me die. Mother. I see my mother. Why are you here? This can't be. My father, my mother, my sister. Why are you here? You can't be here. So thirsty, so hungry. And those are the lyrics for my feel-good hit of the year. Okay, so this is a very kind of free type of poetry. It doesn't have any rhyme. There is a rhythm to the words, of course, but I don't concern myself with rhyme here because it's supposed to be stream of consciousness and capture a mood. I will probably have to change stuff around a bit when I get going, but the point is, now I've kind of done the bit that I find the most difficult, which is doing the words, and now all I have to do is just set these words to music. To help myself out when designing the music for these lyrics, I've done a dynamics graph, my favorite, and it looks like this. So you can see, starts quiet and then gets gradually louder towards the bit. It's going to be the, oh God, let me die bit, because I imagine that's probably a quite intense emotion to have, and so that has to be the super loud and high bit. And then it gradually dies off towards the end as the person accepts their inevitable fate and dies in the desert. Okay, so anyway, but already there, that was that was a big chunk of the work done already, and I haven't even written any music yet. I've decided roughly how I'm going to structure the arrangement, the original composition, and I've got the lyrics, so all I need to do is to write the music. Writing the music is going to be a lot of me just going to the keyboard, trying stuff out. I am going to be using my knowledge, because I'm quite familiar with the instruments, so the male and female voices, I'll be thinking about stuff like where does it sit in their voice, and I'll be using my theory knowledge of how do I get the correct sentiment out of the harmonies. You have to keep in mind what the instruments you're writing for are good at. In the case of voices, it's going to be the fact that they can do words, which isn't something that any other instrument can do. And voices are really good at doing harmonies. So you can, you can get away with a lot of interesting harmony with voices because that's something that singers have been trained to do really well. I will have to capture the sentiment of this poem. I imagine I'm probably going to write something that is quite dissonant, as it's going to be, it's going to be the scatterbrained ramblings of someone who is on the verge of dying. I don't think it's going to be a very pleasant sounding thing. There'll be elements of bits that maybe aren't, so intense, but the overall sentiment will be like, this is a bad situation. I'm not happy about this. And you want your audience to get that sentiment from the music as well. If you didn't, then why are you writing music? You just give them the poem to read. Okay, so I'm not going to show you me just going back and forth between the keyboard and the computer writing in stuff. I will just spend the next few hours writing the music. We'll see how I get on, if I finish it or if I don't. But I'll get back to you with what I have at the end when I'm either finished or too tired to continue, and I will talk about what I've done and why I did it. And you can gauge for yourselves if you think that I did the correct thing or that I'm crazy and you should get a different job, Knut. Okay, I think that I'm more or less finished with the piece. First version of it anyway. More on that later. Let's go through here and let's look at what I did, and I'll say why I did it. So to start, the opening phrase was so thirsty, so hungry. One of my favorite things to do is to bring in one section at a time. So they all get their little entrance. And so I've done that here. And I've also had them all come in seconds. Well, not the sopranos, but so the basses first, boom, minor second. Tenors, there, major second above. Altos, there, minor second. Very dissonant. You're gonna immediately hit the audience with uncomfort. They'll be like, what's happening? Why are they sounding so, why are they so dissonant? And then this phrase, which I use a lot. I think even if you're writing something that is going to be weird and out there, you do still need some motifs and try to kind of create some sort of structure to it. And a lot of composers do pieces where nothing ever repeats and it's all changing the whole time. And I think it's, especially if you're already challenging people with tricky harmony, you need to just give people a break, repeat stuff. It's fine if you repeat something that's dissonant. Yeah, that's fine. That still creates a bit of like structure to it. Not to say that it's necessarily, I'm not the leading authority on this, but that's my personal preference. Okay, let's go on. Good. And once the sopranos come in, I then group together altos, tenors, bass, and against the sopranos here. Sopranos are the topmost voice, and so they will always kind of be the most prevalent parts. Well, them and the basses, because the basses are the bottommost part. The top and the bottom parts will always stick out the most, or they'll be the most easily audible, which is why a lot of choral directors take big issue if the sopranos are flat. And I've spent entire rehearsals with musical directors shouting at the sopranos being flat and just not even caring about the fact that none of the tenors knew what they were doing. But it's just, it's so easy to hear it if they're out. And same with the basses. If the basses, well, what often happens if the basses is out is it makes the other section sound like they're out. Anyway, so let's go on here. All right, so I just keep looping. So hungry, so thirsty. Really getting with this idea. And then I have this nasty descending tritone here in the basses, being like, where am I? Where am I? Everyone stating this. Then we have some choral stuff here. Everyone's singing the same rhythm, still fairly dissonant, but this has more of, I mean, I've spelt it out differently for the sopranos because, singers have to pitch relatively, and so I'm trying to make them pitch relatively to what they've just sung. It is, I mean, I've written this piece in open key, which means it's not really in a key. It shifts around a lot. It would vaguely fit in an E minor key a lot of the time, but if you're going to be writing stuff where it keeps changing, then there's no point putting in accidentals that have to be, changed with natural signs. Just write an open key. It's fine. Right. Stop here. I don't understand what is happening. So hot. That's the first phrase of my poem. Then comes a new section. Has it been a day? Has it been a week? Has it been a month? Again, introducing the sections in opposite order now. Soprano, alto, tenor, and then basses get a new thought, response, and here, a bit of unison. I do think, even if you're... never forget that you can do a bit of unison. It's an easy way to break texture. People like to sing in unison. It's easy. And also, it creates a different sentiment. So it makes the statements stand out. Everything looks the same. In my head, that was an important statement, and so I put it in unison, ending up with everyone on a D except sopranos who are on an E flat, making it dissonant and uncomfortable, because it's like, oh, it's almost at rest, but not quite. So then we have the statement again, so thirsty, and again I use the same motif from the beginning, G, A flat, seconds, and this phrase, so minor second and then ascending fourth. Slightly different here. I wanted to have a bit more tension build, so I have them splitting into a second, and then these guys do the same up, and then they split into a second up here. So dry, and here comes the bit that's a bit more at rest, in my opinion. Keep in mind, before I talk about this, you need to always make sure that the voice leading is good, especially if you're writing music that isn't strictly in a key. It's the only thing that can make music like that work is having effective voice leading through the whole way. So I've always made sure this sort of music can easily fall into that trap of difficult, alternating minor and major seconds, which is really tricky for singers, and a lot of tritone jumps. There are some tritone jumps here, but they're all very deliberate tritone jumps. They're this is the melody, so that's fine. Or it's something that will be made obvious from the harmony. I'm just going to say that now because, again, it's this typical thing, this typical trap that people fall into when arranging for voices is not putting the voice leading first. So I've definitely made sure that the voice leading should always be good. Case in point, here, the sopranos are a bit high and suddenly they're going to be jumping down. But it's a manageable interval, and they get a bit of a break here, so they get a chance to kind of align themselves with this. Now these guys are not singing the same notes, but they will then be right, there's this nice low E here, we're on a D, so we'll just be E and then down one step. Just to give your singers a chance. Right, so this is more broadly in a key, vaguely E minor / major. It does go up to major here. You've got this whole tone thing here. I don't want people to get too comfortable just yet. They're not, you're not safe. You're still trapped in the desert. Right. Repeat. Again, I thought, let's just repeat this phrase. Repetition's good. Take the same phrase, just put it up a step, and then we end up with a different thing happening here. Next thing. Here, I kind of thought it'd be good for them to keep with an established, tonal center here, but I also don't want it to get too comfortable. So I put the sopranos in minor seconds at the top, singing the same thing, not as loudly, but just having this uncomfortable. It's made worse by the fact that the key here is like vaguely a G chord with the soprano singing both a minor and major third at the top. It's what I like to call the Eric Whitacre effect. It's when you have a chord, but you've put the minor and the major third at the top in minor seconds, so that it's both minor and major at the same time, which is a big no-no in arranging, except Eric Whitacre does it quite effectively by putting this dissonant interval right at the top and making it kind of the feature. If you listen to stuff like Sleep, for instance, uses that a lot, and it's quite a striking thing to do, because it means that it's almost a rest, but there's like this like dissonant thing happening. There we go, and keeping this here, now it's between the major third and the fourth. So you keep having the same interval at the top, but it keeps changing its function based on what's going on underneath. But yeah, and then I wanted to have some loud dissonant chords here. These are all diminished chords with an F sharp bass. Every direction leads nowhere. And again, I wanted nowhere to have some emphasis, so that's suddenly open fifths. Suddenly, it's not dissonant anymore, it's open fifths. Leading then back to the sentiment of So Hungry, which again is in minor seconds. Yeah, just, you trick them. You'd be like, oh, we're at rest now, okay. And then it's like, oh, actually, I'm still hungry, guys. And then you chuck that little minor second at the bottom. And my next thing was elaborating, and we're going back. I haven't talked about the tempo too much. It does kind of vaguely stay in the same tempo throughout. I just decided this bit should be a little bit faster because I thought there should be a bit more intent to this part of the song. And then it slows down and goes back to the starting tempo because you're back to the sentiment of, I'm hungry. And you have the same motif of this phrase and then descending chromatically downwards, repeated by the altos underneath. This might be a little bit, no, it'll be fine. I mean, if the altos are holding on to their notes here, that's just a descending perfect fifth and a step. Yeah, it's fine. So I did look up the choir before I started. Of course, it's important that you do that to check it out, just to get a feel of what their level is. And this is a high ability chamber choir, so they should be able to do this. It's tricky. You know what? I'll come back to this. There's something you got to keep in mind when looking into the groups for which you're writing. I'll just make a note for myself to talk about it at the end. Okay, back to the score. So my body twists itself around, calls for help, and again, nice little minor second at the top, and then the chord being completed one by one, sopranos, altos, tenors, basses, and then back to the earlier phrase. This is the same as the endless sounds as far as I can see, except now there's different stuff happening in the bass. So nobody's coming. Ooh, I thought, okay, got to give that to the basses so they get a little feature here. I wouldn't want to put a dissonant interval too low in the basses because it kind of just sounds like a mistake when it's down there, and it's going to sound really muddy. I think dissonances work best when you put them high. That's just my opinion. Right, so they're singing this, and then the same phrase from before. What will they do when they find out? Where are my friends? Nobody can help me now. Just repeating the material, saving myself some time, and also giving the listeners like the experience of, oh, hang on, I've actually heard this before. Great, I have a vague sense of what's happening, but with a different bass note, just so that something's different. Right, endless sounds, exactly the same as before. Bit of unison. I decided to leave out the basses here because they'd have a tricky jump. Like the bass ones would have to do a tritone jump and not like an easy tritone jump. And God, bass twos, unless I put them really low, would be doing a huge interval here. Just leave them out. Whatever. They don't have to do it. It's unison octaves. It's going to be loud anyway. Cool. Back to the theme. Back to the exactly verbatim, except for some of the text, the intro. Now we're back to the starting tempo, and now it's so thirsty, so hot, so thirsty, so hot. Again, repeating material, making my job easier, and making the singer's job easier, and giving the audience sort of a handle. Be like, I've heard this before, I know what's going on. And it's the same kind of sentiment. And here I changed it a bit because now I'm getting closer and closer to what's going to be the climax, which is the oh God, let me die bit. Oh God, let me die. My tongue is dry. It's reminiscent of what we had earlier with the body. My stomach twists itself around. Now it's altos, sopranos, tenors, and then ending this on a nice ambiguous chord. B flat, suspended chord. But it's not, I wouldn't consider it like an ordinary chord, if you will. Now, when you want to build tension and have a climax, I like to build up to a big dominant chord because they sound very tense and like they're going somewhere. So they create this big expectation. Everything is on fire is the next phrase. And here I thought, okay, well, you know what? I want it to be like, all these voices are going on in my head. So I'll be like, all right, sing it on that note, loop lyrics freely, then hold last syllable on cue. Again, something I nicked from Eric Whittaker because he does the same thing in Cloudburst, where there's a bit where you have all the voices coming and saying a thing and then they all end on the same syllable. It's a really, really nice effect. And you can end up with a nice little chord. So I decided to opt for a B... what is it now? B flat dominant with a sharp 5 or flat 6, however you choose to see it. So there's a dominant chord here. They're all ending up on that, and then they are. I should probably respell this. That should be a B flat. Going up a semitone, except not altos, because I wanted a straight dominant chord here. Oh God, we've gone up a semitone. Be like, oh, going up. Tension is rising. Then I gradually move voices upwards. So voices tend to get, progressively louder and also have more of a piercing quality as they get higher. Now, I've written the parts in a general sort of low-ish range for the whole piece so far. Here I thought, right, time for us to get to the emphatic climax where, they're screaming, let me die. So go up and put that nice little flat 9 into the dominant chord to make it have that kind of tense quality. Flat 9s, what my old teachers used to say, flat 9s only ever sound good on dominant chords, but on dominant chords they really do sound amazing. So I did put it in here because it's a big fat dominant chord. Moving up, and then put all the parts in high tessitura. So basses all the way up on D sharp. That's about as high up as I could ever get Ollie to go. And then, these parts split up because people will be, I think most tenors will be fine going to an F sharp. Some will want to scream out that A. Same with altos. You'll have some that will want that B, which is still pretty high, but a bit safer than that D, which is going to be in belt range for the non-classical singers. And the sopranos get to scream their tits off, right, on the on the high B. Right, so we've gone up progressively, speeding up, and then eventually allargando, so getting bigger, kind of, and opening up to the big die. Except I now want a change in sentiment. So the next thing is about, now originally I wrote mother, I see my mother, but then I thought, you know what, if I were dying, I wouldn't be saying, and I were seeing, my mother, I wouldn't think of her as I'd be like, I see my mummy. Daddy, mummy, I see them. You go back to this like infantile need for your parents, and you'd address them as you would as a child, which would be mummy. So I said, right, mummy, and this comes out of the texture. The other parts disappear, and suddenly the altos are on mummy. I see my mummy, and nice little B chord here, just a B major chord with an added 9th. Feels suddenly change the sentiment. It's more at rest. Mummy, I see my mummy, repeat it a few times, and then, nice little minor second at the top again. Because you're not safe, are you? You're still trapped in the desert. You're seeing your mum, and it leads into the next bit. Anyway, these chords are relatively stable. There's some dissonance, and you have a slash chord here, so you have and I've doubled the third here, but it's a split third, and there's a lot of splits happening, and it's not standard triadic harmony, so I'm gonna give myself a pass. It's finishing off and this slash chord. So a slash chord is one chord that is then topped with another chord. Or, well, I mean, it's kind of like a G sharp minor chord with an E natural in there. Functionally, I was thinking of it as an E chord with a G sharp in the bass and then a B triad at the top. It doesn't really matter. It has that slash chord kind of sound. So, a triad on top of another triad. That's the sound it has. So it still feels relatively stable, but there is a complex character to it, if you will. Why are you here? This can't be. This is recycled material from earlier. This is, am I going north? Am I going south? Repurposed. Again here, it's tense. Why are you here? This can't be. Well, you're right. You're trapped in the desert. Why are you seeing your mum? Not a good sign, is it? Followed by, again, the same phrase. Everything looks the same, except now it's daddy, mummy, sister. Why are you here? You can't be here. Now, gradually getting quieter and lower in range. It's much easier to sing quietly in your low range. Getting quieter and lower. And finally, just using a small little cadence here, leading back. I wanted them all in unison for the end. So I chose C sharp, because it's a nice low note for everyone. And as you'll see right at the end, the bass twos finally get a chance to sing their super low notes. And I also, because I'm mean, I decided to throw the sopranos up at a D natural. So again, it's like octaves, but there's like a bit that's out of key. So it's uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable. The instruction arrow to the end is literally dying away, because I want it to die. Oh, going away, thirsty. Oh, I don't know if that's what it's really like to die, but I'll imagine in a musical context, that's going to get the right sentiment across to the audience. Now, I've taken you through the whole thing, but please don't steal my piece. I spend a lot of time working on it. Please don't take it. Now, it's been a long day. It took me all day to write. I was editing it, so it seemed like, boom, it was happening. But in fact, it was just hours and hours of me going back and forth, testing stuff out, trying to remember what I wrote, and then write it in, and then make sure it works, and then going back and getting tired and going to have lunch, and then coming back and be like, yeah, it took a long time. Don't think that this happened through like divine inspiration. This was like long, hard work. So now I need to just step away. You've spent the whole day working on it. I've got it finished in my mind, but it's a really good idea to get a second opinion. So I'm going to send it to Therese. I'm going to have Therese just have a look at it, listen to it with fresh ears, and tell me what she thinks. Now, she is, good for giving feedback on stuff like this. So I'll see what she says, and then I'll take her comments into consideration and maybe do some small changes to what I've got. Because it could be that I had this idea here and then it's not coming across. You'll only know if you send it to someone else, because you can get really buried in your own work and you lose all perspective, and your brain is fried and you can't objectively assess your own work. So don't be afraid to send it to your mates if you just need help finishing it up and making sure that it's actually good. Now finally, as I mentioned, you will want to research the group itself if they've got material out. So in the case of the choir in question, they do have material out, and it seems they did a lot of like contemporary pop music, but the sound I was hearing from them was a classical style of sound, so like low larynx and the sort of sound you would get from a classical chamber choir. So my instinct was then, okay, give them something that is in the vein of classical contemporary music. But it's also, unless the group has specified what they want, you can't be certain if what they do normally is what they're looking for. Could be that they want to try something new. Ultimately, people will like or dislike your work for all sorts of reasons, and not necessarily wrong ones. It could be that, something like what I've written now, I can easily see people hating it. It's full of dissonance. It's uncomfortable. It's designed to make you feel uncomfortable. Not a lot of people like that, and that's completely fine. And I wouldn't expect, a win with this kind of piece. So with competition, you have to think about, right, how much time am I putting in this? What is the payoff? And how much time do I want to spend on it based on that payoff? So for me, I'll want to spend a bit more time maybe adjusting this in case Therese has some useful feedback for me. But, I don't think I'd then be inclined to put in a bunch more work. It's just not going to be worth it. And there's other things I could spend my time on. But, it's a good incentive, especially if you need just to write some music. If there's a competition and it gives you something to work with, I find briefs work really well for me because it means that I have a clear limitation to what I do. It has to be this or this or this, rather than just like, oh, you could write anything in the whole world. And it's like, well, there are millions of options. How on earth am I ever going to choose? So if you have a brief, that means that there's a very clear limitation to what you will be doing. And there we go. That's one way of approaching doing an original choral composition from start to finish. I hope you learned something. Make sure to leave me a comment if you have any questions, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next episode.